joining today. Right now I have the honor and pleasure of introducing a very dear friend of mine, Miss Helen Nieto Hernandez, and she is an expert on environmental issues and sustainability issues, and I thought that she would make a great addition to our summit. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm really happy that I get to talk to you about a little bit about climate action and a little bit of a mix of, I hope that by the end of the session, I can shed a little bit of light on why we all have a role to play, and that no matter what your career choice is or what your expert area is, that you have a contribution to make. And I guess I'll introduce myself first a little bit, and then I'll jump into talking a little bit about the topic. So as Cody said, my name is Sue. I am originally from Mexico, but I am based right now in Singapore. I have been in Southeast Asia for about 9 years now, working at the intersection of policy and private sector. So my background is, I'm a political scientist by training, and political science and economy. And since I was in college, I was kind of always very interested on the natural resources management and on agriculture and forestry. And throughout my career, I have kind of, mixed all of this together. And so right now I work for a consulting firm, and we call, sustainability solutions would be, I guess, the right word. And so what we work on, or what I specialize on, is helping global companies to understand what sustainability means, and how that, and from the title of the session is, how does that translate from the boardroom to the farms, and how we can really contribute to, reducing climate change, stopping climate change, and how all the pieces are connected. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully you will find it useful. So I have a few slides to share with you. Let me figure out how do I play, present. Okay, so just to make sure that we're all kind of starting from the same part, I'm going to talk a little bit about things that I hope we all know, but in case not, I will just highlight them here. So we know that global GHG emissions are rising again. So no matter how you see it, so we have on the left side, we have the GHG, the greenhouse gas emissions, different types, and they're all rising. Before 2018, we were seeing that there were some emissions that were starting to decrease. Unfortunately, they are rising again. So on the right side, you can see the emissions by some of the biggest ones. So China, the US, the combined European Union, and you see the trends are really not very encouraging. This is continuing to growth, and we need to do something about this. So the main question, or one of the big questions here, is what is driving climate change? And I think this is one of my favorite graphs, where you can see by economic sector what is driving climate change. And you see these two big ones here. Is electricity, heat, so energy. And the one that I want to focus on today is this part, which is agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And so I guess one of the questions is, why is agriculture so one of the biggest drivers of climate change? And here I think I would ask you, if you look around and where you are, if you think about, whether you're in your bedroom or your living room or you're in an office or whatever you are, a lot of the products that are around you that are not food have some material or some product that comes from agriculture. So really, things that come from agriculture are everywhere. So here are just some examples that might not be so obvious to everyone. So your clothes, yeah, cotton comes from agriculture. That could be, maybe the t-shirt you're wearing, maybe the sheets that you have in your bedroom. Rubber also comes from a tree. So the tires of your car, the tires of your motorbikes, latex, so condoms, gloves, all of that also comes from a tree. The products that you might have on your bathroom or in your, if you wear makeup, all of this also there has products that come from agriculture. So in particular, this one, which is oils that go into the products that you use in your everyday. So if you think about personal care products or food like Nutella, that kind of like texture that makes it smooth and easy to spread, for example, in creams or soaps and these type of products, it comes from some oils that come from agriculture. So for example, here I have two palms. So this one at the bottom is the coconut palm, which is the one that you're probably most familiar with. And this one at the bottom right is another type of palm that is kind of shorter, and it's sometimes known as African palm, but it's really just more commonly known by palm oil. So if you haven't heard about that, I would really highly encourage you to Google that after and find out more about it, because it's one of the things that is really driving deforestation. So my main point in here is agricultural products are everywhere, in everything we use, everywhere we look at, from wood, from paper, from, everything you have in your bathroom. And so this is one of the things that is really driving climate change. And the other thing that I want to highlight is, how is this driving climate change? So there's two main ways in which agriculture contributes to climate change. So one is deforestation. So farmers would cut down the forest to plant some of these different ingredients that we need for the products that we use in our everyday life. So I wanted to just kind of visually show here two of the main things. So this one, which is the palm that I was just talking about right now, you can see how there is kind of a little sad tiny piece of forest in the corner. And this one at the bottom is from the Amazon, where there is another product, which is soy, where you also can see that it's really just kind of pushing the frontier and decreasing the forest. So when we cut the forest down, the trees and the soil that have had gases trapped on it, just liberate them into the atmosphere in the form of GHG emissions, and then further contributing to climate change. So that's a big way that agriculture contributes to climate change. And another part is through the way we grow the crops, either food or these type of other ingredients. And that comes mainly from using pesticides or how do you say, nutrients, fertilizers and pesticides that then also decrease the health of the soil. And then there's two main ways. So when we use fertilizers, chemical fertilizers, one of the things that happens is that they then contribute to further emissions. And then another thing that happens is that they decrease the health of the soil, so that eventually the soil is so unhealthy that you cannot plant anything in there anymore. And then so farmers are then forced to move into another piece of land and keep creating deforestation to move around. So those are the main ways that agriculture contributes to climate change. So one last thing I would say on this in case you don't know, is that there are four main things that are contributing to deforestation from agriculture. So one is this palm oil that I mentioned. The second one is soy, which is pictured here as well. The third one is timber products. So anything that goes paper, wood for furniture, everything that comes from timber, from trees. And then the fourth one is beef. So beef is also a big contribution. So those are the top four. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about this, let me see, is that calls for climate action are growing louder. So we know this is happening. We know agriculture is one of the main reasons of, or one of the main causes of climate change. And there is more and more pressure for action. And action has to come from different places. So action has to come from governments, but action also has to come from corporations and from everyone. So here, there is a couple of really kind of some of the big calls for actions, or the ones that I find that are kind of very visible. So of course we have on one hand Greenpeace, and then we have things like the one at the bottom is a movement that's called Extinction Rebellion, which I would also encourage you to look. They have a little, very short handbook that they called Extinction Rebellion Handbook, where they talk about how peaceful protest has evolved into actual change across history, and what the research has to say about how to make change through peaceful protest and peaceful disobedience. So the point is, yeah, climate action, calls for climate action are growing louder, and we need to listen and we need to act. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight in this session is that often the case is not that countries or corporations are not listening, or that there is no willingness to change. Often what happens is that it's not easy, it's not straightforward. And so what I really want to focus here is what are the practical challenges, and how are we trying to deal with those, and where there is more work to be done, where we need more people to join and to focus on different areas. So even though there is a lot of calls for action is falling short. And so one of the examples, I think this is a very critical graph that shows that, if we look at the numbers and at the calculations that have been done by the UN framework for climate change and other organizations, is that countries are coming to say, okay, so I have more or less a plan to decrease my country level GHG emissions. And the reality is that what science is telling us is that if we want to live in a more or less okay world as we know it, we need to limit climate change to 2 degrees. All the commitments that we currently have under the Paris Agreement by countries is not going to take us there. I think right now we are still closer to possibly 3 degrees with the commitments that we have right now. And so essentially this figure of what is showing us is that the plans for each country are compatible with how many degrees of change. So the only ones that are compatible with 2 degrees right now is the ambitions or the commitments from Bhutan, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, India, and the Philippines, which are all, not at the top of the countries that are contributing. And so we see, for example, the long list of countries that with their commitments, we are still going to go to a world around 4 degrees. And a world where climate change reaches 4 degrees is a world where we probably cannot inhabit. So action is falling short, and there is a lot we have to do, and we have to do it fast. So to the main point that I wanna discuss, and I want to share a little bit about my experience and how, from the practical trenches we're trying to deal with, and how and what are the main barriers. So who's supposed to do what? I think that sometimes we tend to think in silos, and so the policymakers or the people doing policy are thinking about, how do these look like from the country perspective? How do we, negotiate our position in the international agenda? How do we take on or leverage our role in the international negotiations, etc.? From the corporations, they're kind of always responding on like, is there pressure on us and we have to make profit, etc. And then we go that, even a further step down the chain, and then we have consumers and farmers who often don't even have any idea of, what's the role, what can they do, what does this even mean? So we tend to think about these things in separate, whereas I think that we kind of have to, if we try to be aware of like, what's the role that everyone has to play and under which conditions we're all doing the best we can, then maybe we can try to make more progress. So I'm going to focus a little bit into each of these ones. So I'm going to start with corporations because I think it's one of the most interesting ones, and in some of the ones that in my experience, can have more impact and that have really power to move climate action. And so I think that corporations are right now in a position where, of course, they are, they're one of the things that I keep hearing when I talk to multinational companies is we're still a business and we still have to be profitable. Now, the conversation about whether, the current economic system is the best model, that, we could have a whole conversation about that. But, this session is supposed to be practical. So we are going to assume that this is the system that we have to work with, at least for now. And so under this system, yes, corporations are there to be profitable and grow the business, at least most of them. So that's kind of on one hand. And on the other hand, there is actually also a lot of pressure from civil society and journalists to shed light on what corporations are doing and what corporations are doing wrong or what they are ignoring, to be responsible, and to be responsible with not just the environment, but also with people. So I think that there's definitely a response from corporations. Like, I don't think, I have never been in a meeting, and I don't think there are many people who would openly say like, yeah, we don't care if we kill the forest, or like, we don't care about human rights. Like, I don't think that that's where it's coming from. A lot of these companies have actual commitments and actual targets to contribute to, sorry, that's my dog. Okay. I think he's come now. Okay. So I don't think that, there's, the corporations at the end of the day are run by humans, and most people are not evil people who are thinking like, yes, I want to destroy the forest. A lot of the times the conversations are around, we are making a commitment, but we just don't know how to make that commitment happen. And so going to the challenges, one of the things that I wanted to show you is this. So if we think about a barrel of chocolate, and this particular palm oil that I was talking about at the beginning is the process from where this palm is grown, either in Southeast Asia or in Africa or in Latin America, to the chocolate bar that you get on the supermarket. Is just such a long and complex process. So this is kind of like a simplified example of how this looks like. So you have, the farmer, then you have mills, then refineries, then it goes somewhere else, and it's a really, really long process. So one of the big challenges is like, we don't always know where the materials come from. We don't always know where the food we eat was farmed and what the process that it had to go through to reach us. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if we go back,
we have a frozen screen and we've lost audio.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Sue.
Yep,
So
can hear you.
good? Are we good, or did something happen?
I think we're good, Sue.
We're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, because I heard that maybe some audio issue. Okay, cool. So I think I will go back. Okay, so my point on this was, it's very difficult to know where things come from. I don't know how to go back, sorry. Okay, here. And another issue is that it's not always clear who is responsible for what. So considering there are so many intermediaries in the manufacturing of a product, either the shampoo that you have in your bathroom or the chocolate that you're eating, it's not always clear who is responsible for action at which stage, and who also, importantly, gets to claim the credit for the action that is happening. Another very important thing, and this is where I think that the links have to be highlighted, is that corporations have to operate under the regulations of each country, of different countries. And right now, a lot of the policies around climate change are not clear. And are not clear because countries also partly don't understand, what they can do, partly they don't have enough money to do it. So corporations are also kind of trying to navigate how much they can commit or how much they can invest in a given country, considering, what is the policy framework, and considering what risks they might face. And so, and another important point is what we know and what we don't know in terms of the science. So I'll give you an example. We know for sure that there is the soil, the ground in the agricultural areas. We know that it captures carbon. We know that, but we don't know to some extent for how long, or we don't know if we use, if we implement certain practices, we know that it will continue to capture carbon, but we don't know if there's a limit to that. Is there a limit? And for how long does it stay? We don't know. And that's kind of also an environment in which corporations have to operate, in which there is a lot that the science has done, and there is a lot that we understand, but there are missing pieces still. And so we have to work on one hand, trying to help science continue developing, and on the other hand, like I said, we have to do a lot and we have to do it fast. So we have to operate into these constraints. So I guess my main message in this is that corporations are not always this kind of just evil, big blocks of invisible beings, but rather are made out of people who are facing very practical challenges that we need to identify, and then to find ways to try to overcome them. Then on the farmer side, I think that often what happens is that it kind of escalates down the chain, where you have journalists and civil society yelling, you need to do something about climate change. Then you have corporations saying like, okay, fine, I'm going to do something about this. And the corporation starts kind of escalating down to, all the intermediaries that sell the materials to them. And so that escalates down all the way into the farmer. And then by the time you get to the farmer is like, this doesn't mean anything to me. When you start talking about DOD emissions and like decreasing the impact, it doesn't make any sense. So, often farmers are kind of just doing what they have been doing for years, for decades, what they know, what they understand. And so there is a lot of effort and a lot of work that needs to be done into transmitting the message of like why the practices need to change. And this is not to say that farmers don't have a lot of knowledge or that don't understand about the changes or the climate change. Like, of course they do, and they see it, and they can see, and they can describe how things have changed and how things have, how the forest is decreasing, and that has impact on the quality of water, on the amount of water, etc. But sometimes what they do not always see is the link between the practices that they're doing to the impacts. And another thing is that nature and ecosystems are not valued in the economic sense, or at least not in the majority of cases. So, if I'm a farmer and I have a piece of land that is forest just standing there, that of course is contributing, in all sorts of ways, but it's not giving me any economic benefit, then it's completely understandable on why you cut it down and then you plant, any crop that is going to give you money. So those are the challenges that the farmers are facing. And so I think that the pressure that we put, or one of the key lessons that I found, is that the pressure that we put in corporations should be not just to make sure that they behave sustainable, or that they make sure that they have sustainable practices, but also that this is an inclusive process, and also that it's not just asking from the lowest part of the chain and saying like you have to be sustainable and you have to do these practices, but rather working with them and giving some of the benefits of this with them. Then consumers. So I think like all of us fall into this category, and even if you're not particularly interested in climate change, or if you're not particularly interested in being active in solving some of the challenges, there is a responsibility as a consumer to ask questions at least. And so here I think that we are more and more, and again, without going into the conversation of whether this is the right system or this is how the economic system should work, going into the practicalities, is that we are more and more used to getting cheap things and fast things, and we don't know where the things that we buy come from, and we also don't know who made the things that we buy. And we think that being the global market that we live in, and how connected we are, that our choices don't make a difference. And so I think this is some of the personal challenges that we need to overcome, because we, just asking ourselves and asking and engaging in conversations on like, where do the things that we buy come from? How were they made? This really makes a difference. And I think that we need to start as consumers also trying to be more engaged and trying to understand, and asking from also corporations to be more transparent into these types of topics. So before, I think we would have some time for questions if there are any, but this is what I want to close with. We need more work. So I will say this one more time. We have to do a lot, and we have to do it fast. And there are many, many ways that we can do it. So I just listed here 4 of the important ones that I've seen that have an impact, and what kind of things there are. So one is activism. I think that sometimes activism gets a bit of a bad name, but I can say from firsthand experience, where I have high-level executives from the biggest companies in the world really saying, I don't want to appear in the next Greenpeace report. So, and really coming to consultancies like the one I work with, but also others, saying, what do I have to do, or what do we have to do to make sure that we're not targeted by these type of activists? Because right now there is, especially in the age of social media and the internet, where, you know, one misstep is it can really have an impact on your reputation. I would say this matters, and maybe some type of activism is not always the most constructive, but some of it is, and it matters, and companies listen. So, you know, if that's something that resonates with you, or you're inclined to, I would say it matters, and I've seen it have an impact on really global companies saying, well, yeah, we need to listen and we need to act. So that's one thing. Another one is policy. So we really need more and more people in policy decision making positions to really understand what is the value of really pushing for climate change policy, and really creating an enabling environment for not just the countries themselves to reduce GHG emissions, but also to enable global businesses to do so. I think from the private sector perspective is that it is very challenging to operate in countries where the policy environment is not clear. And of course, there is always, you know, politics and things around this, but I think that there are some key policies that could really help companies drive more climate action, and some countries are not leveraging this. So I think that, you know, ideally we would have more and more people in policy that understand what an enabling environment would look like for really driving climate action beyond just the country itself, from the government side, reducing their energy consumption, etc. But it's rather, how do we do this and also help companies do their own thing with their own money? So on that side. On the science side, like I said, there is a lot of things that scientists know, but there's also things that scientists still don't know, and there are things that are still very expensive. So in particular in agriculture, one of the examples that I said is soil carbon. So we know that carbon has the health of the soil where crops are grown has a really important role to play. But there are a lot of details that we don't know. And there is a lot of research going into that. So on the science side, there's also a lot of things to do. Just yesterday I was talking with someone who is doing research on a specific type of forest in Gabon in Africa. And it's really coming up with things that are really going to help on conservation of biodiversity of some species that are found only in that area. And it's really helping understand how can companies that want to grow some of these ingredients can grow it in a way that minimizes environmental impact while still helping some of the poorest people in the country have some improve their livelihoods. So there is a lot still to do in terms of on science and understanding how some ecosystems work, and in understanding how some particular areas of the ecosystem contribute to climate change or to mitigate climate change. So there's also science is another big area where we can still do a lot. And another one is the business. I think that a lot of businesses still are kind of trying to understand why is their responsibility to take action. And I think that we need to look at some of the companies whose vision has been from the beginning to make sure that whatever they do is responsible and sustainable. So one of the main models for this is a company like Patagonia, for example. They do things for like outdoor activities, so like camping and things like that. And so the vision of the founder has always been around how do we make this, how can we develop in a sustainable way. So we need to look at models that go that way. And I think that we also need business people to be able to understand and connect, you know, what can businesses do? How can businesses really enable just the entire value chain of, like, from the farmers to the moment we as consumers buy something? How can they really enable to still produce their products, but at the same time doing it in a way that is going to be sustainable? Because otherwise, it's, you know, the businesses are going to go out of business. So yeah, so I guess, you know, my main message in all of this is, like, every little piece matters. Every little piece, you know, I heard in a podcast recently, one of the conservationists saying, like, every piece of ecosystem we save matters. Every species we save matters. And so I would agree with that and say, like, it doesn't matter what your interest is, and whatever interest you have, or whatever, you know, path that you take, there is a role for you. And yeah, I will just say we have to do a lot, and we have to do it fast. So let's all find a way to contribute. And I think I will stop here in case there are any questions.
So there's quite a lot of questions in the chat. So I'll be moderating them, and I can just put them forward to you, and then you can answer them one by one. If the participants prefer, they can, like, turn on their microphone and say them themselves. But either way, so there's a really good question about companies in the energy development sector, from Hokin. I hope I'm saying that right. Would you like to say it? Would you like to turn on your mic and read out your question, or let's see. I'll just read it out in the meanwhile. So he says, in the energy development sector, companies that use less sustainable options, like coal mines and fossil fuels, are able to generate more electricity and for a lower cost compared to renewable ways of generating electricity, for example, hydro or solar. How would these more sustainable companies be able to compete with the non-sustainable ones, which have much lower costs? And why would electricity distributors choose a sustainable company?
Okay, yeah. So I think that the first answer, and I would say the most important one, is that the way that these options are valued, or the way that the economic value of these options is being calculated, is it does not take into account the environmental impact, and that's why it's cheaper. So that's on one hand. On the other hand, I think that right now there are some studies that show, and especially when we talk about solar, that solar in certain countries and in certain market conditions is actually cheaper, or is becoming cheaper even by the current economic valuation standards. So that's not always the case, but is more expensive. And then I'm not an energy expert, but I do know that, and this is a bit of a whole kind of controversial topic, but the cheapest, cleanest energy would be nuclear energy. And so, and there is a whole debate around this, but I think that what is one of the things is that technology is moving in a way that this is changing, and solar is already cheaper in some ways. So I would say that it's not always just like that. Yeah.
Thank you. There's another question that was put forward by Anushka that everybody seemed to really like. She said, how can a circular economy be integrated within sustainable palm oil production?
Which one is this? Sorry.
So you'd have to scroll up just a little bit, and it's from Anushka in Singapore.
Well, I think there is one, particular when it comes to palm oil. I think that there is the question of whether this palm oil production can ever be sustainable. And I think that, you know, the answer to that is not as straightforward at all. So I think there's two things that I would say to that. One is that it is very difficult in the current process of producing certain products to reduce the consumption of palm oil. I think that palm oil is here to stay, and we kind of have to accept that because of the contributions that it is also had on improving livelihoods of farmers and people around the world. So that's kind of a piece of the puzzle. And the other piece is that what we can and should be doing is continue putting pressure on companies to make sure that the most valuable parts of, you know, forest or peatland, which is the main impact of palm oil, continue to be supported. So, and I would also add here the piece of the science, where there is definitely a lot of research going on to how can we replace palm oil in certain products, and how can we replace it with different technologies or different types of products that have the same impact. So there's two main things that make palm oil so valuable in the market. So one is it increases the shelf life of products, and two, it's really what makes particularly a product like Nutella, for example, very smooth. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I think if we had the answer to that, it wouldn't be the problem that it is now. But I would say that is the question of whether palm oil could ever be sustainable is still open. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question put forward by our press member, Umema. Umema, would you like to say it out loud?
Yeah, sure. So my question is, there are a lot of food monopolies, and I'd like to ask, are they stalling progress for a more environmentally friendly world? And if yes, how can civil society pressure these food monopolies to establish more sustainable practices in their businesses?
Yeah, so I think that in my experience with the companies that I've worked with, like I said, I don't really see anyone that's saying, let's not do this, or let's try not to do this, but rather is we want to do it, but we don't know how. And that's where I think that all the other pieces of the puzzle come together. I have seen generally so many times where companies, of course, they are acting because of the pressure of civil society, and that's true. They're not coming out of the, you know, goodness of their hearts. So I would say definitely continue to support organizations that are loud, and continue to support organizations that publicly pressure these companies, and continue to pressure these companies publicly. So, you know, organizations like Greenpeace, Mighty Earth, all of these, you might think that they don't have an impact, but they do. Like they really, really do. And so I would say continue to support that part of activism. And on the other hand is a lot of these companies and these organizations, I'm thinking particularly Greenpeace, Mighty Earth, and Oxfam, that is not just about kind of making noise, but it's also kind of not putting their finger off. So they are constantly assessing, and they're constantly asking questions, and they're constantly reviewing the progress. And this matters, definitely. And the other thing that I want to say is that one mistake I think sometimes activism or people make is using kind of sabotage as a tactic, and saying like, oh, if you find someone, you know, if you find a company that's doing deforestation or doing bad practices, you should kind of cut ties with them. Whereas I think that what we should be asking for is, no, then you engage with those ones and you make them better. You use your power and your pressure as a global corporation to make the smaller players have action. So
Thank you very much.
There's another question by Ayomide. I hope I'm saying that right, from the US. I'll just ask her if she wants to go ahead and read out her question. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. So my question is how easy is it to adapt existing buildings to become vertical forest? And could the addition of vertical forest help tackle the issue of deforestation and introducing a more modern form of agriculture?
I think, so I tend to think that the focus should be in conservation first. So I think that, you know, companies or, you know, countries even, there's always this kind of, when we talk about forests, there is a part of conservation, rehabilitation, reforestation, and then things like the one you mentioned on vertical forest. I think there is still a lot of very valuable, well, not as much as we would like, but there's still a lot of valuable forest in many countries. And if it was, from my perspective, the focus should be on, let's make sure that what we have, and the money should go into, let's make sure that what we have there is conserved. And less in this type of kind of innovations, if you will.
Thank you.
There's sort of this recurring question that I've noticed is people asking how they can convince people around them, just as individuals, to pay more attention to issues such as climate change. I think we're so used to seeing like public figures at such a high level kind of deny the whole existence of climate change. So I think they're asking what they can do within their capacity to address that.
Well, there's two things that I like to highlight. I had someone telling me the other day something along the lines of like, well, because I tend to always kind of link it also to, it is in a way a matter of survival, right? And it's not that we are not seeing already impacts of climate change. You know, we are seeing increasing in natural disasters. We are increasingly seeing the loss of biodiversity and what that means for us as humans. So one thing that I always do is kind of also put it in terms of, well, it's actually, you know, our survival that's at risk. And also I try to connect it to real stories. And I think that there is a couple of organizations there that link it to, you know, this isn't a matter of some mythical thing that is happening, but it's things that are real and that are affecting us. And it's a matter of survival. So I think that I always kind of try to put it in those terms. Although there will always be people that, you know, I had someone telling me the other day, well, I don't really care if the human race disappears, you know? And so then from my perspective, it's almost a little bit, you know, a waste of time to engage on that, because then I rather try to focus on people who are maybe at the edge or maybe thinking like, yeah, I know it's a problem, but I don't know what to do about it, and kind of trying to be more constructive on that way.
Thank you. And with that, I think that was our last question. We are out of time. Daphne will just go over the ending announcements, but thank you so much, Ms. Helen, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. Helen and all the participants. As you can see in the chat, we have a 24 hours help desk and a feedback form. So if you want to check this out, we will be really glad. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for being a part of our program. We really appreciated you sharing all your experience with us. You've inspired many.
Bye.
Thank you all. It hurts me. It pains me to click this end meeting for all, but I must do it. So thank you all. Bye-bye. See you in the next session, I hope.